Oh yeah, baby! Oh yeah! You see that, eh? Ah!
I think for those who have been around the game a fair amount, we're not really short of any sort of anniversary event, whether that's the half-year event, or some specific month in particular, or even the anniversary ones. You can look back as far as even 2019, where we were still getting stuff like free summons on seasonal banners and all that jazz. But one of the standout events that happened, that I'm pretty sure a good amount of people may still remember, was the Find and Vote event, where users can vote for any character they wanted, and the top unit of each respective color would be added to a banner for people to summon on. And keep that in mind as we go forward. It wasn't the top 4 units who got the most votes, but rather the top unit in each respective color. But we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves. Let's start with the mode itself. Find and Vote was basically this weird browser game mode where you had to go on your mobile device or whatever the case may be, and then you had to tap on a unit you wanted to summon, and then after that you basically had to play like Where's Waldo with like Alphonse and Sharina or something. It was pretty simple, but the whole thing revolved around scrolling across a specific set map. And even on their site is that it was heavily designed with mobile devices in mind, as the idea was that you had to scroll through the page, which was going to be a bit more difficult on browsers. But of course, why would that stop anybody from using it on a browser anyway? You'd naturally think that they'd probably use it on their mobile device because, well, I mean, they play FEH on their phone or they play it on their tablet or whatever. So naturally, they could just boot up whatever browser comes with whatever tablet they're using, whether that's like Safari for Apple or I don't even know what's on Android, but regardless, there is an option there. And that's basically how it worked for the most part. It was relatively simple. It lasted about, I would say, 5-7 days. But regardless, it was a simple minigame for people to basically just go in, tap a unit they wanted to basically get, and that was really the gist of it. After that, the units with the highest accumulated totals would be put on a banner for people to summon on, and then there was the free summon where you could basically get any random copy of any of the 4 heroes, which, you know what, for what it was worth, it was pretty cool. And for its time, it was pretty interesting because it was one of the few events where people actually had to actually do something, interact with their device that wasn't just like tapping a button, which granted you still did, but it was still a bit more interactive. And even though it was still relatively basic in the grand scheme of things, it was a lot more than what we had back then. But even so, there was a dedicated amount of days where people would choose a unit they wanted to see, they'd vote, and you would go from there. And after the voting period was said and done, we would get the free hero on the 25th. And there's no way you could really think that this was just some sort of disaster, right? Because, I mean, this is intelligence systems we're talking about. They know exactly what they're doing all the time, and they've never messed up before because they're so smart and intelligent, right? It's in the name. However, you know that isn't actually the outcome because, you know, title of the video and all that stuff. Let's talk about what went wrong immediately. One of the biggest issues that came from this mode, and I don't necessarily know if it was on the fault of intelligent systems or just the player base, but you had to scroll, and it was explicitly stated that you would want to use this on some sort of smart tablet or mobile device because that's how it functioned the best, because you needed to scroll through stuff. Like, you had to move the screen and stuff so you could actually scroll through units and vote. Exactly how they showed it in the FEH channel. However, a lot of people didn't pick up on that for some reason, or they just didn't know how to. And to be fair, this was over 3 years ago, so it's hard to say what exactly happened. But chances are, a lot of people just didn't know how to scroll. And whether or not it was because they didn't make it clear in the event itself, or people weren't paying attention, it's really hard to say because, again, this was 3 years ago. The reason this was a big deal was because you started on a select tile with static heroes. So every single day when you clicked on a color, you always started out with the same batch of heroes until you moved around. For red, you had Halloween Mur, Legendary Ike. For blue, you had an assortment of heroes, but surprisingly, the winner didn't even show up on the initial screen. And then for colorless, you had Nina, Niles, Kaze, yada yada yada. But the big swing here was Legendary Lyn at the beginning of the green screen. Do you see where I'm going with this? Maybe you're thinking that I'm just over-exaggerating this point because, well, a lot of people knew how to scroll because, you know, Legendary Azura wasn't on the initial screen, and she was the one who won out of everybody by a huge margin. So how does this apply to Lyn only? In that circumstance, I would absolutely agree with you. However, consider who else is also on the other screens. You have Legendary Ike, you have Zelgius, you have the 4-star Chrom, and this is actually the big point of contention, because if you were to go through the actual results, the highest scoring 4-star on there is actually Chrom, and not by a small margin. He got over 17,000 votes. He beat out units like Alm, Ira, Lucina. He beat out Brave Celica. He almost beat out Legendary Erica as well. A regular 4-star unit who was arguably really bad at the time scored that high. And the only thing I can think of is that because he was on the initial screen, a lot of people simply voted for him. And to be fair, a lot of people also voted for Halloween Mar, which, you know what? Cool. But I'm wondering how much of a difference it would have been if Halloween Mar wasn't, in fact, on the first screen, but somewhere else entirely. We can't really say one way or the other, but I can guarantee that there is precedent for people not scrolling on the mode, because why would you choose Chrom over literally any other 5-star red unit at the time? And this was also before refines were also like getting super pumped out with super high quality. We did have some decent ones for its time, but for the most part, a lot of it simply boiled down to you got the new 5-star because they were the super good one, and a lot of the older units weren't nearly as comparable because they were pretty much dead on arrival. So now if we go back to the green section, we have Helbindi, Winterlissa, Bartray, and Legendary Lyn. And if you ask anybody who was around at the time, chances are they're going to say that Legendary Lyn was arguably the worst legendary ever released. She was not a very desired unit. In fact, she was probably one of the most hated units on legendary banners at the time because of how bad she was. And you would think that would also play a role in people actually voting for a specific character. But also, to be fair, Lyn is very popular. But based on this infograph that I also got from Reddit, because somebody made this at the time, Winterlissa and Helbindi still scored extremely high. Even though they didn't follow Lyn in terms of the green ranking, they still made a 4th and 6th place respectively, which was extremely high. Because even prior, they weren't exactly like the craziest units anyway. A lot of the time you got Bullfighter and you sacked it off to Halloween Jacob or Brave Bow and all that stuff. And for what it was worth, Lissa still had her value, but Helbindi not really. Even though he had his whole wave shtick, it still wasn't exactly the most coveted even at its time. Still, that's what ended up happening. And the top 4 scoring units, in fact, were Legendary Azura, Halloween Mar, Legendary Tiki, and Duma. And where does Lyn fall into all of this? Well, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, the top scoring unit of their respective color are the ones that get put on the banner in the free summon. And because of that, Legendary Tiki got disqualified because Legendary Azura beat her out by over 40,000 votes. And the unit that followed that was Legendary Lyn, with 41,000 votes. The closest green after that was Legendary Hector at 38,000. And I absolutely believe if Legendary Lyn wasn't on the main screen when you clicked green, Legendary Hector absolutely would have won. And to say most people weren't happy with the outcome is definitely an understatement, because now you had 3 really solid units, and then you had Legendary Lyn, and nobody really wanted Lyn. And for what it was worth, it was still a free 5-star summon. So naturally, you could just choose whatever hero you wanted, right? To rub more salt on the wound, there was a predetermined summon going into it. Even in the FEH channel, they disclosed that when you open it, you get a yellow orb, and no matter which yellow orb you choose, it's going to be whatever hero they predetermined. So all 4 of them could have been Duma, Legendary Azura, Halloween Mar, or even Legendary Lyn. And again, to be fair, it was still a free 5-star, but at the same time, it was definitely a slap in the face to those who just wanted a decent unit, because even among Duma, Halloween Mar, and Legendary Azura, even though Legendary Azura was arguably the best unit at the time, even if you ended up with somebody like Duma, he still had a lot of value because he was an Anima Mythic that had upheaval, could break buildings. And even though he did fall off later down the road and then eventually came back a bit with the likes of his remix, he was still a decent unit who had value. Legendary Lyn didn't. And once that was all said and done, the banner rolled around, you got your free summon, and then you could summon on it afterward, which was a nice thing at the very least. So even if you didn't get the unit you wanted, you could still go in and get a specific unit. Granted, this was without the Spark system, so basically it was a way worse chance. But still, for those who got the free unit they wanted, they were quite happy. And you may be wondering, what unit did I get out of all this? Surely I had to have gotten the best unit ever, Duma. But you know what? I'll let the video speak for itself. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was the Find and Vote event. Definitely gone down as one of the more controversial events that happened in FEH history. Not because it was necessarily a bad mode, but because of a bunch of circumstances leading up to the inevitable disappointment for a lot of players. And I'm definitely sure there's more stuff out there that could definitely qualify for top tier disappointment, but this was definitely one of my favorite highlights because of the series of events that led up to the inevitable disappointment for so many people. But I don't know if many of you were there for it at the time. You'll have to let me know down below. And if there was anything that you found even more disappointing, I'm curious, because honestly, I can't think of anything else off the top of my head. And if there's any final words to close this on, it's... thanks for watching.